So, Prateek's already told you a little bit about Saikat's background. We all know that he is a well-established author. He also teaches creative English and creative writing at Ashoka University. He's had a wonderful career both in India and in the US as a teacher, as a writer. And this, what we're going to discuss today, is his fifth book, The Remains of the Body. I'd like to start off by just sharing with you a brief synopsis of the book, because I'm assuming many of you haven't yet got your hands on it, but you will during the course of the evening. Hi. So, what is the book about? And this is what we're going to be discussing and unpacking the various themes this evening in conversation with Saikat. Focusing on friendship and intimacy between three Indian immigrants in North America, this is an intricate fiction from a writer known for his exploration of the unpredictable nature of human sexuality. It's about two men in their mid-30s, childhood friends, who share a deep bond that is put to an unexpected test as one's marriage to a woman starts to crumble under the conflicting arcs of immigrant ambition. As the marriage loses its last breath in an unexpected affair, the other friend, a single man, faces questions about his own desires that he cannot answer. Whose body does he long to touch? Can a man's intimacy with a woman mask his inexpressible desire for someone who lies beyond his reach? Delving deeper into the questions of love, longing, and intimacy, The Remains of the Body challenges conventional notions of marriage and friendship and asks questions about the primitive ways in which human beings reach out to each other. And Saikat, I want to start off by congratulating you on an absolutely brilliant book. I've had the privilege and the pleasure of reading an advanced copy a couple of weeks ago, and it's something I couldn't put down. It's something I had to go back and read several times to really understand the full impact of what you have laid bare. It's a book, as I said, with just three characters in it, two men and a woman, and each character's inner and outer lives are explained and detailed with so much conviction, clarity, as well as compassion, I would like to think, that I feel, as a reader, I know them all. I may be a man, but I just also feel that the Sunetra, the woman's character's inner journey, inner life is explained so beautifully that I can just as well coalesce and flow into her mind, her body, as well as that of the other two men. So it's a richly layered, nuanced book, very poignant, very powerful, and I hope you all get a chance to read it. It's also a book that's, part of it, the three characters were originally from Calcutta in West Bengal, where I grew up and where you grew up. So a lot of the nuances of the Bengali connection there is amazing for those of us who know friends in Calcutta at least. And then, of course, it transports us to the US and to Canada, which is wonderful. And I think it's a sensory, savory experience. It's, I think, your best body of work, pun intended. But so let's just get straight down to it. So, Saikat, how did this novel come to you? What are the beginnings of this? What inspired you to explore these themes of intimacy, desire, and longing?
Well, thank you. First, I want to thank all of you. I know it's a weeknight and things can be difficult with all the traffic, so it's lovely to see all of you here. Thanks to Quorum and Penguin, especially to Shawnee and Prateek for making this happen. And Vivek, I'm so happy that a very talented actor and director is actually, I mean, with Vivek you can't go wrong because you just know that you can't outshine him. He's just there, like a kind of a lighthouse. So this is really good to be here. You know, I don't know, do you choose novels? I don't think so. I think novels choose you. You know, they kind of take hold of you and they say, tell me, you know, you kind of just are kind of grabbed. But I think I should say that two big themes of this novel is marriage and friendship. And marriage, of course, who doesn't know? That's the old chestnut. You know, so writers have written about it forever, novelists especially, you know, for the longest time. 19th century novels, you know, 20th century novels. And I think, you know, anyone who's been in a marriage or long-term relationship, I think marriage is a bit like blue cheese. The longer it is, it starts to stink. But the connoisseur appreciates the stench. So stench is not a bad thing, that's stench. But it's also about friendship, and I'm very interested in the concept of friendship. What is friendship? And you know, anybody in corporate life, political life, we've just went through the elections, can we be really friends? Is it possible to be friends without being instrumental? And I'm really interested in friendship between opposites. Do you have a friend with whom you don't agree politically, you don't see eye to eye, but there's something that binds you? You connect with them, or are you friends with someone whose philosophy of life you share? So I have been very interested in this kind of idea of friendship between opposites. And in this particular novel, what happens is, what are the limits of friendship between heterosexual men? What are the erotic limits? People who imagine they're straight. And yet, these are friends. Think of someone you've known from childhood, and this applies to men and women. You've known them from childhood, you've seen their bodies change. You've probably come to puberty together. You've had kind of talked about sexual fantasies, not for each other, but around. You've kind of seen them grow. And then in your 30s, 40s, their body changes. And I think for my protagonist, the big question is, I know this person more than anybody else. Why isn't there an erotic connection? Why is this intense physical awareness not becoming erotic? I mean, I guess in some ways I think of this novel as a failed dream for pansexuality. I think it's really unfair that we can only be attracted to one gender. Why can't we be attracted to all genders? And this is the kind of fantasy this person has. So what happens is, with this character, but this friend is also married. So when he sees his wife, he's thinking, oh, she's known him intimately. She knows his body in a way I don't. Even though I know his body, but I don't know his body. And there are interesting scenes. And I think this starts to shape his feelings for her. And I won't give out all that happens, but there's a lot going on between these three characters. But the question is, what kind of desire is it? Is it straight desire? Is it gay desire? Is it queer desire? When all of things, and what happens when you have this kind of chemistry with a close friend's wife? At the same time, you're really intensely. I think it's really kind of, I'm fascinated by this. I've written about this. You've read The Scent of God, where people are very different. That was a story about a boarding school romance where a very kind of a radical boy is drawn to somebody aspiring for engineering and jointing. So I'm fascinated by the idea of, and I think we all have these friendships. We are friends with that person we wouldn't even talk to now if we met them as adults. Because we have this primitive kind of underwear sharing friendship. And why is that? What is that underwear sharing friendship which is not quite sexual? And that is, I think, the thing that really drove me. And as you know, I've been driven by disruptive desire. Disruptive desire really animates a sentence. When a sentence, and I teach creative writing, I tell this to my students, when a sentence is weighed down by information, it looks heavy. When a sentence is animated by desire, its syntax changes. It has a kind of a spring in its step. It's like the sentence is walking. It's like walking as if it's dancing. And that is what motivates me, once you get disruptive desire, because it can never be fulfilled. That failure of desire is what keeps me writing. And that is what I think you probably have sensed in this book.
So the desire of these three protagonists, that's Avik, the friend who lives in San Diego. San Diego, yes, in the US. And the other friend, Kostav, who lives in Toronto, who's a teacher there. And Avik's wife, Sunetra, exactly, or Sue as she's called. So how did you conjure up their three characters? Is it based on people you already know, or this some completely figment of your imagination, or a mix of both?
You really want me to now sort of put people in the spot. People talk a lot about books being banned because of religion and politics. People don't talk about families breaking up because of books. And I'm sure anybody who's written a book knows that, oh my God, that's the end of that relationship, right? That I'm not going to do. But it's kind of tricky. No, I think I'm the kind of writer who needs a seed of reality. But if that seed of reality is strong enough, I can make a forest out of it. But I need that seed. I need that little seed. I admire writers who are entirely speculative, who create things out of nothing. I need a little bit of reality.
That got you to
yeah, I mean, the seed is different. There
yeah.
are different things, like, and obviously with my novel, The Firebird, the theater novel we were talking about, it's about a child's obsession with his mother as an actress. And my mother was an actress, so there is that seed. This is much less real. This is much more fictional. much more fictional. Now, of course, who hasn't known that kind of underwear sharing friendship? We all have friends like that. We all have friends like that who have that, kind of. And I've seen other people having those friends, and they say like, oh my God, I just don't get along. Let's not get started about the elections. I will have a fight. And yet they're friends because there's some kind of a primitive love, some kind of a primitive thing. And that is something. See, you don't have to know facts. I think novels are born of emotions. So again, something I tell my students, when you're describing a scene, don't go by the details. What is the governing emotion? What is the emotion here? And for me, the emotion here was a kind of a sexual quest, was a kind of a sexual confusion that what does this friend's body means to me? So there's a scene in the novel where they're talking about women, they're talking about being excited, and Gustav kind of feels, are we getting excited physically? And then he thinks of those things, but we are not connected in that way. So I think that was the governing thing. And, I've always been drawn to writing strong female characters. In fact, as a reader also, I'm very much drawn to writing by women. I love writing by women. And that's partly because I think I'm not a big political headline type of writer. I don't write about the partition, I don't write about the election, but my novels are often described as very political. But the politics in my novel has been seen as the politics of the bedroom, the politics of the neighborhood chai shop, the politics of the street, the politics of office, the politics of gender, the politics of sexuality, the politics of school. So politics in the private sphere is what draws me always. That is what always draws me. And this is, I think, where I've always been drawn to creating strong female characters. So Sunetra is one such character. She's a scientist, she's very smart. And I think I'm drawn to creating female characters who are extremely intelligent but who are fighting some inner demons. And that's how, they all came together a week. I think, again, sometimes you create a bit of a stock life, a stock character. Again, I tell my students, create a stock character, put a twist to it. Create diasporic life, how they are, how they party, the songs, the same old, the drunkenness. I think stock situations are good because people can identify. But don't let it be stock. Put a little twist. Put something else. So I think, to kind of that answer is that I know some of them, I know parts of them, but this is the least, it's the most fictional, one of the most fictional of my novels. But I've known elements of this. But that quest, what I call that failed pansexual dream, the question Gustav has, why is it that I am not attracted to so-and-so person not? And that question is what kind of drove it. And that question is something I've thought about it, at least intellectually, even if not viscerally.
Interesting. Well, in the acknowledgements section, I just want to read the very first para that you've written. You've written, sometimes we write because there is a wound in our experience of life about which we can do nothing. Writing then becomes a cry of both pain and war. These pages try to fight the unfairness of desire, of injustices created by the intricate histories of our cultures that shape our longings, and these remains are the plea to dwell in lacunae that cannot be named. So what is the wound that you write about? What is this pain, this cry of pain and war, and what are the lacunae? Since you've been very explicit about, it's very resonant in your own life.
Everybody knows the first thing people read is the acknowledgement, right? That's the first thing people look.
So it's your first para of the acknowledgement, so it's pretty bold.
So clearly, the acknowledgement had to be right there. No, I know the literature, I'm going to slightly step back and answer this. Literature is, I think it applies to all art form in a way, but especially fiction, is an amazing thing because it allows you to become somebody else. It is a great celebration of yourself, but it also allows you to somebody completely different. And that is something I always try to do as a writer. What is it to write as a woman? What is it to write as somebody from the working class, which I think is the hardest. I found, by the way, writing from a different class position much harder than writing from a different gender position of a person of the same class. Mm-hmm. And that's partly why I have been so obsessed with childhood. I've written about childhood, 2 of my novels. And childhood is that otherness which we all once possessed. We are not children, but we were children once. Very few men can say, I was once a woman. Some men can say that, but very few. Very few women can say that I was once a man. But all of us adults can say that I was once a child. And that is fascinating because childhood is a time of primal terrors, primal pleasures. But you can't understand what are those terrors. And this gulf between understanding and experience is a very rich space for art. So just to give that example of sexuality, I went to a boarding school. And all boys boarding school. And of course, the romance and love between boys was very common. It kind of stayed within its universe. It didn't step out, but it was very common. And I had a very interesting role here. So people found out that I could write. So I started getting requests to write love letters. So I used to write love letters for other people. It was fantastic, and this was like, I'm talking like, late 80s, early 90s, obviously long before social media and all that, handwritten letters. And I can't tell you, I must have written at least 15, 20 letters. It's really fascinating. I had no idea it would actually prepare me as a novelist later. You actually enter somebody else's desire. Oh, I find that guy really cute. I don't find that guy cute at all. Maybe I don't find guys good. But I became that person, and I actually wrote for that person. This is really fascinating. There's some amazing confusion. So there was this, not just about guys. Once it happens that this guy had a big crush on a girl. This actually happened in high school. But he couldn't write letters. So he got somebody to write the letters for him. And a third boy was the messenger. So fine, 3 people are involved, and then this is going on. And then there's a proposal being met. Shall we meet? The girl says, fine, I'll meet. The big question is, who does she want to meet? There are 3 people involved in this chain of courage. It's an existential question. Who's really her lover? And I'm not making this up. It's like, in the end, she sort of became close to one of them, and they are married. They are still married, but she didn't marry the guy who actually had a crush. So it's quite fascinating. For me, this is a great metaphor for literature because, this is what you try to do as a writer. You become somebody else. You enter somebody else's shoes. And it allows you to feel things you don't necessarily feel in your own life. But this is what you try to do. But, it's very complicated. I do think world would be a different place. I think in some ways this particular novel is what I call is the queerness of straight lives. Lives which are imagined as straight have queer moments. Literature is about realizing that, what I think is the other has parts of self in it. And my self has parts of otherness which I don't recognize. It really messes you up. You realize. And that is what I think I was trying to do here. Just the way you write a letter and discover you become somebody else. It's like you realize that, there are moments of queerness in the lives of people who think they're straight, whose lives are very heteronormative. And I've always been drawn by this. My other novels, which I will talk about in a moment, maybe later, there's always that. So I think that is what I was trying to get to. But once you start writing, your sense of your life and your art becomes seamless. You don't know where the line is drawn. But that, I think that pain, is it my pain? Is it the character's pain? Is it a pain out there in the world? How long should gay lives be marginal? Should they become just before this, I did an interview with a newspaper like, making queerness mainstream. I think if anything this novel does, it tries to make queerness mainstream by reminding us that all our lives have queer moments. No matter how heteronormative we imagine. In fact, the heteronormative ideal is an abstract. It's an abstract that works really well for the state of the market, but our real happiness comes from very strange moments, strange, dangerous moments sometimes. And those are the moments that this book has tried to capture.
Interesting. So lots of training from those letter writing skills that you picked up.
Definitely. I've written about that. I've written a couple of essays about this letter writing thing, and it's really fascinating. If I start telling you some of the examples, that'll become its whole session. The kind of people. It's really interesting. There's the kind of jock and prom queen narrative. Those of you know the kind of American high school jingo. The same things happen within boys, and it's fascinating. Sometimes you're writing for the jock, for the prom queen. Sometimes you're writing for the prom queen, for the jock. And I've done all of this. So it's like Samuel Richardson. Samuel Richardson, the English novel started like this. The Richardson, all these working class women, these maids, they wanted to write letters, but they couldn't write. And Richardson actually wrote letters for them. And as you know, the first English novel, Pamela and Clarissa, where epistolary novels, they're written by women. And I'm like, oh my God, am I doing? I found that I didn't know any of that when I was writing letters in ninth grade or 8th grade. But I realized, yeah, this is fascinating. If you ever try, I think now maybe you can impersonate or Tinder or Bumble or whatever, you can become somebody else. So there's a different kind of internet posing that you can do. But that's actually very interesting. Try becoming, I mean, actors, what am I telling you? Actors do this all the time. You become a different person.
Sure.
And it's fascinating. I think we should all try to become different people.
Well, material for your next book there about your letter writing. I'm going to read a little extract and then we can talk about more about why you wrote this book and what the characters actually mean. Is that fine, Saikat?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I'm waiting to hear this in your voice, so it's a treat.
Yeah, your writing, my voice. Let's go for it. Is everyone quite comfortable there at the back? Yes. Okay. So here we go. He also knew Sunetra in ways that she could never imagine. And that knowledge had made her a part of him, hidden deep inside. It was hard not to remember what kind of intimacies she liked, exactly as Avik liked to tell him, and how there was weird stuff Avik would not ever quite do. Naturally, whatever Avik couldn't do became weird. In his universe, they could not exist in any other shape. Kaustav knew things about both their bodies, Avik's and Sunetra's, even skin that he had never seen. Sometimes Kaustav felt as if he too had touched Sunetra. It was a place of explosive curiosity, a curiosity-like desire. But it was a place hard to see. Kaustav had never seen it. She was rinsing something in the sink. That boy banter was charming in the college cafeteria, she said, without looking up. Not so cool now. All these engineers and corporate scientists with triple chins and bloated bellies acting like teenagers. Kaustav sucked in his stomach sharply. He was addicted to the gym and was sometimes taken to be in his late 20s. White people couldn't tell brown age, but it had been more than 15 years since college. Sunetra still looked like a graduate student. She loved to swim and surf and seemed to eat barely anything. She didn't mean Kaustav. It couldn't be him, but Raja and Bidyut and that obnoxious Saurav who seemed to drive down from San Jose every other weekend, their madness with goat curry for dinner and sausages for breakfast, and their wobbly tummies that laughed along with their sad jokes and endlessly recycled memories from their engineering college hostel days. But for a moment, lights went out inside Kaustav. Did Sunetra really see him out of shape? Not you, she turned and faced him laughing. You still look like a chit of a college student. Kaustav sensed his ears turning warm. It always felt like Sunetra flashed something brutal at him, like a shapely machete. The slim, boyish body and the delicate face under those large glasses. She was tossing her womanhood at him, a kind of a girlhood almost. Something whispered inside Kaustav. She could see through people. She had seen through Avik's coarse, bloated rowdiness and had fallen for the big-hearted baby inside in a way that had been a jolt to Kaustav. In the end, it didn't make sense. Could a woman like Sunetra really be happy with a guy like Avik? There was something about her you didn't understand, something that frightened you sometimes. Where was Avik now? He had to just walk into the kitchen, throw his arm around Kaustav, breathe scotch into his mouth, and something would melt inside Kaustav. It was a calming, homecoming sort of love. It did not electrocute him into unhappy desire. It never had, not even in their teenage when they had lain next to each other in bed and swapped fantasies. The heat in their bodies was a known truth, but you cannot get attracted to your own body, can you? Sometimes Avik would throw a pillow between his legs to shield his hardness. But soon Kaustav would see him slowly rubbing himself against it like a dog. And he would just want to reach out and hug Avik, make his body his own. He wanted to keep that boy for himself forever. Women were not alien to Kaustav. Women were drawn to him, perhaps because in some small ways, he was like them. Short and small-boned with chiseled features, he looked like an elf sometimes, a schoolboy in college, and now a postdoctoral fellow. Still something of a graduate student. There was no real manliness, nothing steel-shore, no serious odor or habit, but something air-like, almost ethereal. He could draw women easily, get them addicted to his company and play with their bodies. Once in a while, women forgot that he was a man. They spoke about intimate things in front of him and he gossiped with them, lost to the world. No one knew about that but Avik, who made fun of it all but secretly loved his slippery feminine friendships and was a mocking cheerleader. He would never admit it, but it never mattered to him what Kaustav did. He always meant the same to Avik, something outside of time. Avik just tried to drown it in mockery. But a woman's body could never become your own. It could never melt into you the way a man's could. The alien pull could kill you. Sunetra knew that, didn't she? She knew how close Kaustav was to her husband, how they'd shared underwear as teenagers, and what did she care about that? She looked at him and laughed with disdain. But she could see his ears turning red, didn't she? So,
now I cannot write but think of your voice. I feel like my words are written for you.
Thank you so much. But I enjoyed reading all of it. All of it is very, very powerful and can be performed as well, surely. It's all just very, very visual. So coming to the theme of sexuality, which you talk about, your main character, I would think, amongst the three, Kaustav probably stands out as the main of the three. Is Kaustav bisexual? Is he gay? Does it even matter? Does he know what he wants? Or is that the process of discovery that you've gone along in this book?
You know, I mean, I guess all writing is a kind of a quest. That was like Freud's whole theory. He was walking and he sees his grandson is playing with a toy and saying, "Fort da, gone back, gone back." So quest. So narrative is like that. Narrative is always about a loss and a kind of refinding. I think Kaustav is obviously discovering. He's confused. I think it would be much less interesting if you knew. I mean, there are various ways. I sometimes thought he's a gay man trapped in a straight body. Mm-hmm. He's a seeking pansexual. But I think most importantly, I'd say he is trying to account for his love for this friend, this deep love that I have. And what does it really mean for me? What does it mean? And what does it mean when I get close to his wife? And I'm not going to say any more because there are things happening which I don't want to give out. But I think one question, I guess, that comes up is that sometimes when you are intimate with someone, you're trying to reach somebody else. You're actually not being with that person, but you're actually trying to reach somebody else through this person's body. And I think these are the things that are going through Kaustav's mind. It's not very clear. He's clearly, I think the most defining thing is that he loves both of these people. Mm-hmm. He loves both this man and this woman. He's much closer, he's known them. But I think he is really figuring out. Avik is much more of an alpha male. He's kind of sure. But he is definitely figuring out what does this friendship mean to him and why this friendship, why this intense awareness of one's body is not sexualized. It's almost disappointed. He's almost disappointed by that. So I don't know what name you have for that. I mean, it's obviously something, kind of coming. And these are people who, there are other moments in the book where Kaustav is put into a situation with a man, but you know that he doesn't quite act in the way that would actually label him as gay. Mm-hmm. But there's always that question. I think disruptive desire has always powered me, always powered me. Things which don't make sense, like when I was writing my theater novel, The Firebird, this boy was watching his mother acting on stage, and he was very scared, like, why is she kissing another man? What does it really mean? Is she doing something she shouldn't be doing? And there's this hidden Oedipal connection, that possession of his mother. With the scent of God, obviously the boy is in the boarding school, and they are, sitting in a religious setting, they're praying, but their bodies are touching. So I've always been kind of driven by disruptive desire. I don't know if I have a name for it. I wouldn't necessarily give it a name. For me, a boy's desire for his mother, which borders on the Oedipal, is as disruptive as two boys feeling a stirring in their knees when they're singing a religious song. the kind of whole connection of the erotic and the spiritual, which defined that atmosphere, made me write that novel. So I think I'm always driven by this really things which are hard to pin down. And I think these moments are there in all our lives. They're very much there. But these are not moments about which you have greetings cards. These are not moments about which you have anniversaries. These are not moments about which you can talk about. These are sometimes moments of shame. These are sometimes moments that are, and I think this book is about all those moments. All those moments.
But expand on your idea of pansexuality. It's not something that one has read in other novels, the fact that you can be in love with any gender. So talk about queer, being queer. What does that mean for you?
Well, as I said, for me, queer is anything that is not normative. I think normative desire, as we see it, as a heterosexual marriage, I think these are wonderful things that serve society. They're there for the stability of society. It sort of gives the state and the market, children, and that is obviously essential. But there are all other kinds of desire. You know, I mean, I'm thinking of so many things. You know, as a Bengali, I've read so many of Rabindranath Tagore's novels, and the whole brother-in-law and the sister-in-law. What is that dynamic? That sweet kind of connection. Who hasn't had a crush on a cousin growing up? You know, who hasn't had a crush on a teacher? You know, what is that? My last novel, Middle Finger, was about the erotics of pedagogy. When you're teaching, especially when you're teaching something artistic, there's a kind of erotic force there. Acting, I'm sure. When a director is and erotic is not sexual. I mean, erotic in a much more primitive, Freudian, Platonic sense, as the sole force of the eros, that of life. And that, all of that which cannot be classified, cannot be canonized, cannot be registered, is what I think is queer for me. And that goes far beyond the binary of the straight and the gay. I mean, you know, think of, you know, fascinating things. You know, now we are getting into a stage where people are saying, oh, you must register. I was thinking of what's happening in Uttarakhand, that you must register if you're living with somebody. And it's kind of fascinating. I said, oh, the neighborhood uncle is replaced by the neighborhood magistrate, right? But the funny thing is that if you are of the same sex, you don't need to. So it's quite interesting that sometimes homophobia actually creates a hospitable space for homosexuality. Just by refusing to acknowledge it, you're actually creating a safe space for it. You know, so it's really interesting. I mean, obviously that's what I did in my novel, The Scent of God, where the monastic order, okay, nobody is we don't have women, so there's no desire. Okay, what a joke. You know? So I am interested in any form of disruptive desire which cannot be canonized, which cannot be registered, and that for me is queer.
So on the one hand, you're talking about pansexuality. You can be in love with whoever you want. So how do you explain this classification of LGBTQ? Are we giving too many names? How does that resonate for you, both the spectrum?
I think names are important. So there are legal spaces, social spaces, activist spaces, where you need names, where you need classifications. You can't go to the court saying that, oh, disruptive, let's have a law on disruptive desire. Sorry, that doesn't happen. You know, we need to names for those things, so certain things. But I think the space of art is different. Art can be responsible if it wants to. Art can be completely irresponsible. Art has to be given that freedom. Art needs to be playful. And I think, you know, in my novel, The Scent of God, it came out after the 377 was out, sort of decriminalized, you know, homosexuality. And there was a lot of expectation, kind of a more strident, polemical gay novel. Whereas I think people found it very quiet. I'm like, these two boys, they're like 13 or 14-year-old. They don't even know what puberty is. They don't even know what sexuality is. So obviously it's going to be like that. You know, and I think, so for me, I'd say, to put it simply, the activist space, the legal space, the artistic space, these are all different spaces. I think we need labels for the legal spaces and the social spaces, because there you cannot be indeterminate. It cannot be, you know, this confusion can only go so far. But the artistic space is where I think we need the gray. We need to celebrate the gray of life. And I think this is a place where a certain kind of education happens, that we all become more enriched and alive to the queerness of life. I think writers are queer, all writers are queer. I think art is queer. Art sits at an angle from life. It is never straight. It's always queer. So I think in a sense, I think the word queer literature is an oxymoron, because, you know, it's a tautology, sorry, because literature by definition is queer. So,
well, you write that Kaustav liked watching people, especially when they were confused. So do you like watching people who are confused about their sexuality, maybe? What confusion do you see in today's young generation? Or are they more self-assured than previous generations?
Vivek doesn't mince his words. He's just, okay, what is that? There's no getting away from him. There's no confusion. Well, I'll try to answer. Kaustav is by profession an anthropologist. He's a postdoctoral fellow in anthropology. And anthropology is the great art of watching people, isn't it? It's a very voyeuristic discipline. The great discipline of voyeurism. I mean, you write, and I find anthropology fascinating as a novelist. And novelist and anthropologist have a lot in common. In fact, a lot of anthropologists have written novels. So you watch people. You just go, you just take in, you just become there and you just watch people and you kind of record them. It's fascinating. So I think the big question in anthropology has been that the observer's personal life, does it come into play? Are you a detached observer or are you an involved observer? So when you're writing an account, are you also part of what you're saying or are you outside? And this has caused a lot of debate in anthropology. I love reading anthropological accounts. And I think that is where Kaustav comes in. I mean, he's obviously not doing this as an anthropologist, but he loves, I think he loves confusion. So one thing one example I want to give is like, friends have certain pet subjects they talk about. Pet problems. Okay, fine. It could be marriage, it could be whatever, in-laws, it could be. And, the problems are unsolvable. Then it cannot be solved. And you know that your friend should do something and they'll never do it. But secretly you like that it's not solvable. Because that keeps your friendship going. Oh God, there we go again, we nag and you're not going to do this. And people have this kind of weird thing. So Kaustav, I think, loves unsolvable problems. He, at some level, he's like, oh God, you're so boorish, you're just being so mean. But that's him. So I think he definitely likes observing and I mean, that was also the writer's challenge. How do you write the observer? Because how do you write the person who's writing the novel? How do you observe the person who's observing the reality? So it's a big challenge. So I think observation is a big thorny thing here.
Sure. So moving on from the theme of sexuality and identity to sort of migration issues. I mean, all three of them have settled in the West. So talk about your own experience of maybe growing up in Calcutta and then actually studying and living and working in the West. How does that color the characters in your book? Would it have been slightly different if they were all still based in India when this story is evolving? So what nuances, what flavors do you think it may have contributed to their journey in this book?
Fair. I never thought I'll write something set in American suburbs. Anybody who's lived there, most boring place in the world, right? Come on, who wants to be? Even San Diego, with that amazing weather, is just really dead dull. I would much rather write a novel set in Calcutta or Bombay or Delhi, or even Gurgaon has more life. I mean, it's like way more. And but the fascinating thing is, when you write, and several of my novels have been set in Indian cities, it's this incredible carnival. People are walking, there's all kinds of noises, hawkers shouting, people coming in, the bell is ringing 20 times, and then, somebody's sweeping the floor, you have to even put your feet. It's just this complete chaos all the time. And it's fascinating. That's what I tried to capture. But when I said this novel, it's quite short, it's more of a novella, in the quietness of the American suburb allowed me to focus on the interior lives. It was really fascinating. I think this, I'd say, is the most European of all my novels. It's kind of just three characters. And it's, imagine there's one scene in the Quebec cottage set in the snow, literally silent. Snow falling is the most interesting silence. And it's a kind of an atmosphere which turns you inward. You want to look into what's happening. Which is not to say you can't have interior lives in a city. You can. In a city, you can be the most alone. You can be the most lonely in a big city. So I know all that. But I was very drawn by this quietness of the setting, which allowed me to look inside. But this quietness is deceptive. Because this quietness, underneath this quietness, are the simmering ambitions of immigrant life. And the simmering ambition of immigrant life is what leads to the breakup of the marriage. The marriage is crumbling not because of sexual issues, but because of their conflicts in ambition. And I think I found that fascinating. It's very quiet, but there are kind of tensions festering underneath. This whole immigrant dream of house and 2 cars and all that. And it's very interesting kind of an atmosphere. And also diasporic life can be very insular in some ways. So I wanted to capture all of that. I mean, to put it briefly, I think it allowed me to look inward. In an Indian city, I'm so distracted. I'm so fascinated by what's going on. I'm always paying attention. I mean, I sometimes hold my writing workshops at Ashoka in the dhaba, in the open field. I said that, this is the one place, let's listen to what I'm saying, but listen to what's happening, what they're saying in the next table. Gossip, eavesdrop, be distracted. That's one thing in arts, being distracted is a wonderful thing. So Indian cities allow me the beauty of distraction, but the silence gave me something else.
But having said that, in a different locale, different geography, the relationship between the man and the woman, the husband and the wife, could be replicated in India as well. There's this same fight over ambition, career, money, children. So that doesn't really change. So is that a human?
Not entirely. I think the couple here, they're both scientists, and I think scientific goals are sort of set in a high level. She has a PhD from Caltech, he has a PhD from UCLA. I think scientific goals are kind of happen at a very high pace.
So what does that add to the flavor of the characters?
I think,
that shared experience of living and working.
When you leave your country and go and live in a different country, you've staked a lot. You've really staked a lot in your life and the ambitions. And here, I think the conflict, I don't want to give out too much of the novel, is between the academia and industry. So scientists face this all the time. Am I going to be an academic scientist, or do I join the corporate world? And that is the conflict between the two. And the stakes of these questions are strung at a much higher pace I found in the US. I think the stakes quite haven't, certainly in academia in India, I don't think the stakes are quite as high, or the rewards, or the prices are quite as high. So that part was important. But for me, the most important thing was the silence and the texture of American life, which allowed me to look at the characters in a different way. That was actually more important.
And I've loved the way you've captured all the Bengaliness of the friends who meet up every weekend, and they have major parties with Bengali food. And there are lots of references to singing old Bengali songs, remembering old Bengali addas. So that Bengaliness and academia, you can't take it out of. You can take them out of Bengal, but not out of a Bengali. Interesting. So let's move on to the theme of marriage, which obviously is very important in this book with the main couple. I just want to quote a few lines. This is about the child that has come from the marriage of Avik and Sunetra. And you've written, what was it for him to learn that his parents didn't like each other, that they had become strangers with a flow of hatred? Hatred? Was that too strong a word? Did couples come to hate each other? Was hate the inverse of love? Or was it detachment, the snipping of the bond? What does marriage mean to you in today's complicated landscape?
Well, I think marriage is...
And then again, I just want to qualify that with what kind of marriages?
I think marriage or any kind of long-term relationship is, especially marriage, I think, this is, I'm just going to digress for a bit and talk about this lovely essay by Lionel Trilling. He's writing on Lolita. He's saying that he's talking about European marriages in the 19th century. European marriages in the 19th century between royalty, they're not about romance. They're on property, political alliances, all of these things. So people sought romance outside of marriage. It was very common. It was very common. And that's why so many of European novels are about adultery. Because romance must have that element of danger in it. If there's no element of danger, it's never romantic. And then he goes on to say, Nabokov's really controversial novel Lolita, where a man in his early 50s is in love with a 12-year-old girl. He's saying, but in the 20th century, adultery is so meh. That's not exciting anymore. It's now become boring. Now the danger is occupied by pedophilia. So there's a very dangerous essay by Trilling, but it's a brilliant one. And anybody who's read Lolita knows that it's one of those novels which you just love, and yet politically and ethically you're so torn. Like, what is going on? Who am I supposed to? Am I supposed to hate this guy, Humbert? He's a pedophile. But he's such a compelling pedophile. He's got this incredible voice. What do I do? And I think that's one of the greatest moments when you're divided, when you're politically against something that you're aesthetically drawn to. That is the true test that how do you respond to it? We all want to politically approve that we artistically like, which is why you see a lot of politically correct art. Films are always trying to make a message, do things, but I think the most daring ones are where they can cleave the two, that you are drawn to it and yet there's something decadent about it. So, and I think, and I think that way, I think I'm always drawn to that. I'm always drawn to art's dalliance with the dangerous. Whether you do, it's like, one of those ads, you see like closed caption, train driver, closed circuit, do not imitate. So art should have that thing. Do not imitate. All the stories about, boys trying to catcall people because in Hindi movies people do it. The problem is people don't understand art has a frame. Art is life with a frame. So that is the dangerous space that I'm always trying to capture as an artist. And that I find is really fascinating.
And coming back to marriages, which is skillfully avoided. Anything about that? And what about marriages and if the crumbling marriage, particularly for children whose parents are coming to terms with their sexuality?
He doesn't give up, no? He doesn't forget. There's no way you can let things out. Director. Yeah, I think
it's an important facet and a theme of your book, so I just wanted to push you a little bit.
I think it's fascinating. My parents divorced when I was 12. And I come from a broken marriage. And this was the late 80s, and it was traumatic because divorces were not common at the time. It was not handled well. And it was also connected to my mother's life, and my mother was an actress. Mm-hmm. And the kind of prejudices, the kind of things that are around, and it was very compelling, which gave me a lot of trauma, but also gave me a novel. So trauma is not a bad thing. Trauma kind of creates art. So I have to say that I think it's obviously difficult for a child. A child derives their existence, their justification from two parents. That's how they are. If they're brought up under a single mother and I know or a single parent, then it's a different thing. But to see, and I think one sentence I'm very attached to in the description of Manan is, he was not an unhappy child. He's a happy child with an unhappy life. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to see that happiness. And the couple here are quite sophisticated. They're shielding the boy from all of that. And the sadness is still very much there. But of course, that's not the focus. And I think, every novel, the ending should also feel like a beginning. And I kind of wanted to keep it that way. Because, life doesn't end. Life goes on. Art just puts a frame. And what happens outside of that, no one knows. Even I don't know. But the characters must feel organic. They must have a life after that.
Interesting. Thank you. I'm going to read one more passage, if I may. Are we all good for time?
Let's have some. I would love to hear some questions too from audience.
Questions right away? Okay.
So I think I would like you to read a passage.
Sure, and then a few more questions, then we'll open it up. Yeah? Okay. Thank you. Avik's generosity was large. It needed space. It thrust out like a bully. It pushed and poked Kaustav even in front of Sunetra, but his voice never hushed the way it did when he was alone with Kaustav, smoking a cigarette in the backyard or standing by the beach at night. He seemed to want to hide their animal bond, something that looked chunky and boyish, before his wife, with whom he was all jabs of irony and "do I really care" humor. He settled into his beanbag when the three of them sat before the TV at night. They were watching the Netflix series Outlander, a couple of episodes every night after Manan went to bed. Sunetra had introduced the show to Kaustav, and something made him secretly happy to know that his friend, too, was a fan. Avik was a lover who couldn't love. There was a romantic inside Avik, one who could blunder around in love, but who was awkward with women. Movies were lovely as they offered no real people to deal with. Sunetra and Kaustav took the sofa. Kaustav sensed the warmth of his comfort with Sunetra. Some of her body was known to him too. A little bit of her had belonged to him this morning. Her hand, which he had held in the zoo, a homecoming hard to forget. Avik sat down with a beer. Sunetra and Kaustav both sipped wine while medieval Scotland came roaring at them. Sunetra had spread out a blanket over her and Kaustav's legs. She stretched out, put her wine glass on the coffee table next to her, and placed her feet on Kaustav's lap. The show dimmed for Kaustav. The brightness of the screen melted into the darkness outside it and created a blue haze. His hand rested on her feet. Avik had never put his feet on his lap. His big, burly, dirty feet. That would be terribly rude, and he would punch Avik if he did. Sunetra's feet were small and beautiful. Her skin was smooth and delicate, but her feet were not soft. They were bony, restless, opinionated. The Scottish mead hall was a dream nightmare. It floated in a haze while his hand slept on the vein under her toe. Avik was lost in the show. Sunetra didn't even exist for him while he watched. He would never look back. Kaustav felt himself getting warm. His breath quickened. He glanced at Avik. He wanted to sit with him. He missed his touch. It had been many years since they had talked about the secret lives of their bodies with knots in their throats. Now, when they did, they analyzed. They made fun of people. One of their friends had been arrested for trying to meet a minor on a date. Bloody sicko. But once upon a time, they had talked about their own fantasies, looking away from each other, fighting their own arousal. Something in Kaustav had been curious about the cock that bothered Avik so. Sometimes he wanted to see it, but he'd never wanted to touch. Sunetra's feet rested on his lap, the tired heel of a friend. He wanted to take care of the feet, take away their tiredness. So the erotic element of your book is quite significant compared to your previous ones. Yes. So how did that feel, and was it necessary to bring out these inner landscapes of the three protagonists through all this erotic description, a lot of it homoerotic as well? Yeah. Were you comfortable writing it? What was the impact you felt? So just go
all
through
kinds.
that.
And it gets a lot hotter later on, as you know. So I'm glad you read that passage and not others. I think there's a need for really, I don't know how to say it, tasteful but elegant writing about sex. I think we lack it. There isn't a lot of it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm thinking of even classics like Lady Chatterley's Lover. And I wonder why that is. I think we are a little more daring on screen. You see more representation of this on screen, but I think when it comes to language, and it's kind of sad. Certainly in the Indian context, India was sexually a much more permissive society, much more fluid. If you look at our gods and goddesses and all that, but it's really the British colonial rule which made us prudish. You know, British colonial Victorian morality, the Protestant ethic, all of that really kind of made us very limited. And even rules like 377 of all of these are kind of British colonial rules that were imposed. But I think there's also another reason why people are scared. Because erotic writing has a long tradition, disturbing tradition of objectifying women. Erotic writing can become demeaning, and I think this is why the liberal intelligentsia is prudish, because they're scared of, okay, what kind of power positions am I kind of showing? So if you look at even Indian literature, even to Indian literature in English, the most daring erotic writing has come from gay writers. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm thinking of writers like Raja Rao, R. Raj Rao, or Hansda Chandrasekhar, or even Hoshang Marchand's poetry. There is a lot of sexual description in these writings. And I think, but I don't think there is a lot of actual erotic description in I mean, I'm thinking even of Sally Rooney's novels. If any of you've read, there's a lot of sexual act, a lot of lovemaking in these novels, but there is very little physical description. Mm-hmm. So why are we not describing bodies? Why are we not describing sensations? Why is that? And I think I'm very drawn to it. I'm very drawn to describing these things. I mean, just the way I said in The Scent of God, I talked about these young boys, their puberty, their confusion, their touch. Here again, you know, between, you know, there's all kinds, you know, men, women, men and men. There's a lot of it. Because I think, you know, true writing happens with our entire sensibility. I love that quote by T.S. Eliot. A true poet unites a sound of a typewriter, smell of cooking, reading Spinoza, and falling in love. So you don't just write with your brain or your heart, you write with your entire body. You know, it's like, again, Eliot is saying, true poet, look into your heart and write. Why heart? Look into your heart, look into your digestive tracts. look into your stomach, look into every part of you. So I think that's what for me defines imaginative writing, when your entire sensibility, your entire body is kind of speaking. It doesn't have to be a chorus, it can be a cacophony, but they're all speaking together. And that is why I think it's so interesting, because you have sex not just with your body, but you have sex on your mind as well. Sometimes that's the most. Often I will write an erotic passage entirely through conversation. So I do a lot of creative writing workshops too. One of my favorite exercises is to give them, this is write the secret conversation. So two people, they have something on their mind they can't talk about. But how do you bring it out? So one example is two people who should not be romantically interested. Maybe they're married to other people, maybe they're in a different position, but they can't talk about it. So how do you write a conversation where they're talking about something else, but the energy of that erotic interest is coming out in that conversation? So this is something which I've often given us. And so I'm very interested in the erotic in many forms, but I will not shy away from writing about the erotic in bodily terms either. So I've written that in this novel, and I've written that more explicitly than any of my previous novels.
It's very beautiful, it's very poignant, it's not at all,
Thank you. Thank you.
Difficult to digest.
That's good to know.
I also looked up on the internet that you wrote an essay in 2021 called Remains of the Body, which was about a horrible dream, the worst dream you've ever had in your life. And I want to maybe spend a couple of minutes asking you how that may have inspired you with, A, the title of this book, and also about the remains of the body. What does that really mean?
Well, that was a very
strange
dream.
And then we move to some questions from the audience.
I'll just end with this. That was a very strange dream. This is a real dream I had. So my father passed away in his 50s. I was in my 20s. I was in the US at the time. Both my parents passed away in their 50s. I was in my 20s. And I had this very strange dream that my father is very ill. He's very ill. He's almost dying. He's in a coma. But he's not dead. He's not dead. And there are a bunch of pallbearers waiting for him to die later outside the house. The moment he dies, they're going to carry him away. And then, but he's not dead. He's still breathing. And then somebody says, if this goes on forever, we're not going to get anybody to carry his body to the crematorium. This is going on. They're going to go home. So they decide to carry him away. So he's still breathing. But they decide to. I had this really bizarre dream. So they're sticking incense sticks in his body, and while he's slightly breathing. And I wrote about this during the time of COVID. So what was happening, it came back to me during COVID times because, when I couldn't come to visit my parents when they're dying. I was in the US, I was a student, and the mind happened too suddenly. But I saw the same thing happening during the COVID pandemic. That people couldn't visit a loved one dying, even sometimes when they're in the same city, because it was too dangerous. I mean, in fact, we lost our landlord. We just moved to a different house, and it was like, just in Vasant Vihar at the time. I was living in Vasant Vihar, and just same place, but couldn't. And it was very strange to hear somebody you knew like just last week has died, and you can't see them. So for me, that was a kind of a strange remains of the body. I mean, here, of course, the title, I became attached to the expression. Here, of course, the body is more of an erotic body. But I'm intensely aware of bodies when I write, because I think in the end, I write with my body.
Thank you for sharing that. I know there are a lot of questions I can still go on asking you. The book is short, but it opens up so many avenues of discussion. I'd like to open this up to our wonderful audience here who've been very patient and very quiet. If any of you have any questions, comments, suggestions.
We have a microphone that can.
There's a mic that will be passed around. Anything you'd like to ask Saikat about his prior work even? You may not have read The Remains of the Body as yet. Please, ma'am, yes.
Thank you for that wonderful conversation. I'm trying to probe and get the artist and the writer in you in a slightly difficult position, probably. But you said you
done so far.
Oh my God, he's done his bit. Yeah.
So I know you talked about Lolita. You talked about that how art can say, and I especially emphasize on that comment you made of art being in a frame. And my question is on artists' responsibilities. You know, do artists also have responsibilities to outside that frame, you know, to everything that lies outside that frame? And so you said about disruptive desire. And my question is, what about all that the disruptive desire disrupts? How do you talk about disruptive desire as an artist within that frame in your art when all that it can disrupt a lot more outside that frame? How do you bring that responsibility into your writing?
Well, maybe I should first frame that question by saying that this is my wife. So, 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 so there is a lot going on. Maybe I should.
Yes.
So,
Of course, you too.
so I mean, this when she's saying what
Thanks
you
for the
disrupt.
disclaimer.
I'm going
Yes.
to No, I think the sort of the non-framed answer to that would be you keep it contained within your art. You keep it contained within your art. You just so you know, like art is very strange. You know, artists like to have this sort of magnet on their fridge: write drunk, edit sober. So you write drunk. When you write, it just kind of comes soaring out, and you kind of, you know, like when you create characters. We've been talking a lot about characters. You know, I know a novel is working when the characters run away from me. I've created something, and then they are misbehaving. They are not becoming what I want them to become. That's when I know the novel is working. It's become a kind of a live animal. It will not listen to me anymore. That's when I. But then there's a very pragmatic, rational, dispassionate part that is the editor. And I think that part kicks in. And I think you know better than others, maybe, that I write very quickly. I may finish a novel in 3 months, but I might edit it for 2 years. So I think, you know, I think it's, I think the challenge is to really keep it within the frame. And here it helps that I'm a novelist, but I'm also a teacher of literature. I know the history behind craft. I know about that. And I talk about this all the time, and I teach young people. You know, I teach young people. And I talk about, and because today we are living in a politically very volatile atmosphere, we talk about these things, and I tell them that art must engage with these questions, but art must also have its autonomy. Art must also exist in a separate space. So I know, I think about these things, and I think the challenge is that not to let the disruption spill beyond the frame of the art. That is the short answer to that. Whether or not one is always successful, maybe you know that, but but definitely that is what one has to do.
Thank you for disrupting the questions. Yes, we'll go to the gentleman at the back there, and then we'll go with ma'am first here.
Hi, that was an amazing talk. You emote really well, so I can imagine how emotive your book will be. I just want to know about your creative writing workshops, because I'd be keen to attend a few.
Yeah, we have a lot of those. I mean, you mean like how we do a creative writing workshop? I mean, right now at Ashoka University, so I set up a department there of creative writing. When I came, I moved here after many years of teaching in the US, but I came here because the opportunity of setting up a new university is very exciting. So we set it up, and I think we have a lot of interesting things going at Ashoka, and that was the first department of creative writing in an Indian university. Right now, it's mostly for our students, but I do a lot of workshops outside in the community. I do workshops in literary festivals. I mean, it can just be a one-time thing, you know, one-day thing, or it can be a longer thing. It depends. I've done a lot of disembodied online workshops during COVID days. So those are also things. But it's a fascinating thing, you know. It's very, you talk a bit about the writing process, you talk a bit about it, and then you have people write, and then you interact over it.
So how can one be privy to that information?
You and I can talk about that later. Sure.
Okay, thanks.
Yes. So, you mentioned the disruptive nature being within. Is that mic on? Because that's probably Shashank's stage voice. Is the mic on?
Which is probably better than a mic. He
Is
clearly
this
doesn't.
is this better? Yeah. So this disruption within a frame. Now I wonder whether disruption may not necessarily be the purpose, but all great art actually has disrupted at some point or the other outside that frame. So isn't it a little self-defeating when you talk of being disruptive within a frame and not without?
Yeah.
Or, I just get the sense that anything that has touched us, and when I say art, I mean, even technology as an art form, it has disrupted, changed, transformed society in ways that we could not have imagined in the last 15, 20 odd years. I mean, what we have seen by way of disruption in the last 20 years of evolution of society, we've probably not seen in the last 1,000 years. So, I mean, I think disruption is a good thing, and the unintended consequences is something that we are compelled and responsible to actually deal with subsequently.
That's a great question. Thank you very much. And I know you're an actor. You probably break, what do you call, the fourth wall? The fourth wall. And I think the fourth wall, breaking the fourth wall is the great point where the art spills out. You speak to the audience. So definitely. No, I think I probably pushed too much, the frame thing a little too much, because there are some kind of dangerous things in this book which I would not prescribe. But I think, no, art has often, absolutely. I mean, I'm thinking simply of anti-colonial literature, a lot of anti-colonial poetry. I mean, it's kind of weaponized as struggle, anti-slavery. All of that is very much where the disruption is what gets out. People feel that singing, people feel that reciting a poem, people do street art, and that's where it definitely spills out. So no. I mean, I probably gave the wrong impression of art should always be within a frame. It should not always be, but it's unpredictable. I think art's relationship with life is very unpredictable. You cannot take art always as a formula for life, as a recipe for life. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Keats wrote that letter that, saints are boring. The devil is much more interesting. Why is in Milton's Paradise Lost, God is so boring? Satan is the fascinating figure. And Milton was definitely not a Christian when he wrote it. He was... Exactly. Oh my God, don't even get to the Hindu. That's a whole other thing. I mean, when Peter Brooks did the Mahabharata, he just couldn't explain to his Protestant audience why this great person who gives the Gita is also an incorrigible flirt. Why does he keep flirting with women? Because you can't imagine Jesus doing that, right? Jesus doesn't flirt with women, but Krishna flirts with women. So he came up with this version that, there's the scripture version of Krishna which gives the Gita, and the folk version of Krishna which is with gopis, which is all utter rubbish. There's the same Krishna, but it doesn't sit in the same Protestant worldview. But yeah, so that's when the Hellenic and the Hindu worldview is definitely much more disruptive. The Abrahamic vision of religion is much more morally rigorous. Yeah, very much so.
Thank you. One more question. Go ahead.
Okay. Congratulations, it's a very sensually aware novel. I've had the privilege of reading the first few chapters. But I wanted to ask you, did you draw from the lives of, say, queer authors like Virginia Woolf and Beta Sackville-West? Because you also mentioned love letters, and their love letters are extremely sort of sensory and extremely platonic as well, to some extent. Did you draw from those? Has that crept into your work and your craft, or is it just your observations on life and love that...
Absolutely. As I said earlier, that I'm actually more drawn to the feminine stories than the masculine stories. I would probably give up a story on the World War to read a poem about two women gossiping in a kitchen. That's the kind of thing I love. I mean, I think two women gossiping in a kitchen is as important as a story on the war. And I think that's not how literature is seen these days. It is seen as, is it on an important subject? I don't think the subject should matter at all. It's really how you treat the subject. But I'm drawn to this private story. So Woolf, who is an intensely political writer, her 3 Guineas is about the war, but she's really looking at the war from a domestic private vision. And that is what draws me. I think I'm also being called a very political writer, but as I said, politics of the bedroom, politics of the neighborhood tea shop. And I think that, and most importantly, the discourse. This is something which French feminism, putting on my academic hat for a moment, that a certain kind of sentence is feminine. a Joycean sentence is feminine because it doesn't have punctuation, it doesn't have paragraph breaks, it goes on and on. Molly Bloom's reverie. The sentence has a gender. It's not about who's writing it, but the sentence has a kind of feminine sentence. The French feminism. So I think Woolf is definitely that kind of a writer. And I think I'm very much a writer of that mode. I've been very shaped by it. I mean, clearly when Hélène Cixous, the French feminist, is writing The Laugh of the Medusa, she's saying that, why should we write in straight biographical or structure, paragraphs? All that is very patriarchal. Let's break out of it. Let's not have uppercase, lowercase. Let's not have punctuations. And I have, but I don't have quotation marks in this novel, as you must notice. I wanted the fluidity. Sometimes you don't know who's talking. But definitely, I think discursively, I have definitely drawn from that worldview of queerness, of that feminine worldview. That is what inspires me. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Okay, one last question. I think we're running out of time.
Hi, have you ever considered having a character kill another? I think murder is plenty erotic, no? I mean, it could be.
Well,
Erotic,
Tanuj, you are much better at this than I am. I mean, I think Manji
it can be a
you are the
soft
thriller
murder.
writer. Tanuj is a thriller. I mean, he's written all kinds of things, but his last novel, Manji's Mayhem, I just love it. The things. So there's a lot of. I mean, you do that really well. I mean, we have our division of labor, right?
On a serious note, what I intended to ask was, I think the sexual energy or desire is not too far away from this desire to annihilate, right? And have you ever given it a thought?
I have. You read The Firebird. I know that you have, and there are two deaths. And I think that novel. I'm going to give out, but it opens with this memory I have as a child, 5-year-old child, and my mother is playing a role and she's dying. And it's a terrifying thing. She's acting in a play. But I was young, I didn't know what was going on. I realized she was dying, and somehow I retained that memory. So later on, I was teaching actually at Stanford at the time, and I told this to a colleague who's a theater person. I said, I have this strange fear in my head of this memory of my mother dying. And she said, I think you have a novel there. So that was the beginning of The Firebird, and this boy who's watching his mother die on stage, and there are real deaths. There is even a murder. But I think that is the novel about the failure to distinguish between art and life, that you kind of try to enact. There is obviously a character, even the idea that judgment on women actresses, if they are acting like a loose woman on stage, if they're kissing men, they must also be like that in real life. So this is a kind of a hypocrisy. All this kind of Taif culture after Hiramandi, we've been hearing about that, this performance culture. And this has been a kind of a long tradition that if you're performing, or even if you're acting, I mean, when Bengali theatre started in Calcutta, they could not get middle-class women to perform. They had to go to the red light districts to get women to perform. So I think it's kind of this fascinating spillage between art and life that has always happened. And out of that, the most dangerous murders actually come out of that because of this confusion. I'm not going to say more. But that is the novel where, of course, there are murders, and you took me back to that. And you're absolutely right that love is not that far from murder. You're right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, for engaging conversation. I mean, this is your 5th novel. It's being touted as your best work so far. Do you agree?
That's what a novelist wants to hear always, that my recent work is the best, so that I still have good years before me. I haven't done that.
But so far, I meant so far, your best work so far.
I think, it's like this, some things get better with time. It's like this, my sociology professor used to say, this culture and civilization. Civilization always get better. We build better bridges, we invent better medicine, but does art get better? Does society improve? So in writing also, it's like that. Certain things always gets better. Your technique gets better. Your sentences get sharper. Your language gets finer. But the soul of a novel, that's very hard. Sometimes the soul of a novel, maybe your 3rd novel is your base, maybe your 6th novel, so it doesn't progress. But I have to say that I've done something, and I'm also very happy that I've written such a short novel, of course, given attention span and all that. But I'm happy that I could write something so short, just with 3 characters. It's probably my most minimalist novel. It's the least, and it's interesting, the kind of focus on interiority. So I've definitely departed in a new direction.
Right.
So in that sense, I'm very happy that this came out the way it is, and I'm grateful that you've responded to it in this way. That is very special. Thank you, Vivek.
May your body of work continue to increase and impress us. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for being here and a wonderful audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.